the bat, I do not intend for this to be another one of those
bikes are super expensive
kind of videos. We all know bikes are super expensive. We all expect bikes to be super expensive. There's already tons of videos on that. GC Performance, for example, has done tons of great content on that very topic. Instead, what I want to focus on today are 3 options that I think are particularly overpriced, even in this expensive bike market that we are in. This is just my opinion, and really all I'm trying to say is that I just suggest that you do a little bit of homework, trying to find a good price if you're in the market for one of these 3 options. Also, to clarify, I am not knocking the bikes in and of themselves. These are amazing bikes. I just think they're a bit overpriced. Okay, so let's hop right into it. The first option is going to be the Cervelo Caledonia 105 mechanical. Now, this is one of my favorite endurance bikes. It has a very racy feel and a very racy geometry, but it still adds tons of comfort by smoothing out those road vibrations quite a bit more than like a Cervelo R5 or S5 would. But my biggest problem with this bike is the componentry. So for the year 2022 and 2023, both of those years, they had a Shimano 105 crank, which made the bike look good. Now, for the year 2024, the only change they've made is they've taken off the 105 crank and put on a generic Shimano FCRS whatever something crank. That's literally the only change they made to this bike, aside from also changing the colors a little bit. But really, the only change they made to this bike is they made it worse. This literally reminds me of those like parody Apple commercials where they say the only thing we changed about the iPhone this year is we made it worse.
That's why with the iPhone 7, we've made it worse.
I did a first look video on this bike, which you can find here. And essentially, what I noticed when looking that bike over was that all of the components just seemed so generic. It was the most generic handlebar in the world. It was the most generic stem in the world. It was the most generic seat post in the world, the most generic wheels in the world. But I kind of gave it a pass because at least I had the 105 crank, and that sort of wrapped the whole thing up in a nice little package. But now they've just taken that crank off and put a generic crank on, and that's it. There was a 105 crank and now it's gone.
And that's all. That's the newness right there. It's just the lack of a thing that was there and now it's not. It's gone. It's not there anymore.
So now, in addition to all the other super generic components that seem like those are components you would find at like a Home Depot store or something, now it's like the most generic crank set in the world. Yet they're still asking the same MSRP of $3,200, which given all these extremely generic components just seems way outlandish and way overpriced to me. And I don't really understand what Cervelo's infatuation is with this generic Shimano FCRS crank. I don't know why they put this on all of their 105 equipped bikes. They use the same crank on their Soloist, and they use the same crank on their 105 Di2 Caledonia and 105 Di2 Soloist, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. At first I was thinking maybe it's like a component availability issue, but every other company seems to have no problem outfitting their 105 bikes with an actual 105 crank. So it just makes zero sense to me. I feel like Cervelo is turning this Caledonia 105 into just an extremely generic bike. Take this, for example, and compare it to something in the same category, like a Trek Domane SL5 Gen 4. This is the brand new Domane that Trek just announced, and this sits in the same category as the Cervelo, but look how much more of a value proposition this is. First of all, you have the internal cable routing, which I feel just looks a lot nicer. You have the actual 105 crank. You have some storage options in the down tube, which just make the bike so practical, and this is, in my opinion, one of the most comfortable bikes in the world. Yes, it is a tad more expensive, but not by much, and the value proposition I think is just a lot more understandable, whereas with this Cervelo. Now, having said that, there are tons of places you can find this bike for much cheaper. A lot of places, for instance, have this on sale right now for $2,400, which that is an excellent price for this bike. I feel like that puts it definitely in the category of reasonable, and even places like Pro's Closet will have it used for even cheaper than that, which makes it even more of a good deal. And the nice thing about buying a bike like this for that kind of discount is then if you ever go to resell it, that high MSRP actually protects your investment. It protects the value of your investment. If you're able to buy it cheaper, then you're using that high MSRP to your advantage. The other reason, really quick, why I would say do not buy it for $3,200 is because this particular design of this bike has been around since 2020, and my thinking is that they are going to probably redesign it within the next year or two. Particularly the external cables, I feel like are most likely going to be replaced by internal cable routing, probably something close to what the Soloist does. The Soloist has the cables routing underneath the stem and then through the head tube. So it's not completely internal, makes it easy to replace the stem and do some maintenance, but it is just prettier in my opinion. Okay, so that's that. The second option on this list is going to be actually kind of two bikes lumped into one. The Trek Madone and the Trek Domane SLR version in particular. So these are two bikes, in my opinion, that have some of the craziest MSRPs I've ever seen. So for example, if we look at the Madone SLR, awesome bike, but check out where it starts. The starting price is $8,000, and that gets you simply a 105 Di2 componentry set, which to me is just bonkers because I do not understand why they are starting the price for that so high when you look at the rest of the industry. And if you want rival, then they're actually asking $8,400, which $8,400 for a rival group set to me just seems crazy. But here's the thing. For $9,000, you can get a Cervelo S5. And when you're spending this kind of money, in my opinion, the reputation of the bike matters at that point. The Cervelo S5 has been used to win the Tour de France 2 years in a row. That is a crazy good reputation. So when you spend $9,000 on that bike, you're also kind of purchasing a bike history along with that. For that kind of price point, in my opinion, I would find that fairly relevant. But the Trek Madone, what is the reputation or what is the resume of the Trek Madone? I know it does get used in World Tour races, and it is an excellent bike. It is a very fast bike, but it has never won the Tour de France, at least not this version of it. When they're competing with the S5 at that same price point, it just seems a bit imbalanced in my opinion. Now, I mean, if we go back to the 105 Di2 and rival, I mean, $8,000 for a 105 Di2 is just crazy. You don't really find that anywhere else in the bike industry. Most rival and 105 Di2 equipped bikes will probably sell for between like the $4,500 to $5,500 range, which I think is a much better price point for that componentry. Now you could say maybe because of the looks, I will definitely give that to the Trek Madone. The Trek Madone and the S5, in my opinion, are probably the best looking bikes ever made in history. That's just my opinion, of course. Maybe you could say Trek is charging for the design there, but then what about the Domane, which sells for, again, $8,000 for a 105 Di2? Domane, excellent bike. It's my favorite endurance bike personally, but looks wise, it pretty much does just look like any regular bike. So I don't see why this bike in particular should cost that much. Like, what is the sell? What is the justification? Why does this bike cost $8,000 when another bike with the same componentry costs, like $3,000 less? But again, you guys, this is a situation where I would do some homework because there are lots of places you can find these bikes way, way cheaper. For example, if you look at bikeroom.com, now I've never purchased from here, but I've done a lot of research and people do seem to indicate it is legit. However, I've not purchased, so if you do purchase, do so at your own risk. But I personally would purchase from here. But look how much cheaper you can find some of these bikes. Like, check this out. This is a Trek Madone SLR Gen 7 Ultegra Di2, and they're only asking $5,700. That is a crazy good deal. Even like pre-COVID pricing, that would be a really good deal. This is what I'm talking about, you guys. If you can get a bike for this price with this much of a discount, which can definitely be found, then you're using that high MSRP to your advantage. Now again, let's look at the Domane. See, they have a Domane here, 105 Di2 for about $4,800. Again, way cheaper than the $8,000 that they're asking. And this, I think, is an excellent, excellent price for this bike. And one thing I learned from GC Performance is Trek actually has a refurb program where if you go to their Red Barn Refresh website, they actually sell used bikes directly from themselves. And again, you can find these bikes for pretty good discounts there as well. Okay, so now the last bike on this list is going to be the Specialized Tarmac SL8. Now, we all know this is a crazy expensive bike. There's tons of videos on this topic. They just announced this bike, and that's pretty much like the only thing people were saying about it is look how crazy pricey it is. Specialized Tarmac obviously is an awesome bike. It's a really good racer. The reason why I'm putting it on this list is not just to yell and scream about how expensive it is, but I wanted to draw attention to the Tarmac SL7, which is now being offered at a really good discount. And the SL7 and the SL8 are almost identical. The SL8, of course, is a little bit better. I think I heard somewhere it was maybe in the realm of like 12 watts faster, which really is not that significant. I mean, of course, that's subjective. If it's worth it to you, that's fine. But for most people, I think the SL7 is probably going to be just as good of a bike for all intents and purposes. And when you can find it now at this much of a discount, it's definitely a way more attractive option. Because again, these rival group sets for the SL8 looks like they're starting at $6,500, which isn't as pricey as the Madone, which wanted like literally $2,000 more than that. But it's still pretty pricey for rival, and then Ultegra and all that, you start to get to the 8,000s. But you know, if you check out the SL7, those are now starting for literally thousands less for the same componentry and a very similar frame. So I would just consider the SL7 personally, but that's just me, totally up to you. Anyway guys, that's it. Just wanted to share my opinion on 3 bikes that I think if you look around you can find good deals on. Let me know what you think. Am I totally off? Are all these prices totally justified? Love to hear your opinion. Otherwise, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.